Days Gone is one of those games that sat in my backlog for ages, like a title that I always had in the back of my mind, but never really got around to actually trying out. You know how it is. Life gets in the way, or other games just seem more urgent or relevant at the time. That's what happened with me and Days Gone. I've always had a soft spot for these types of games. For instance, I'm a huge fan of The Last of Us, which has a similar vibe. Post-apocalyptic, survival themes, and character-driven storytelling. So, naturally, Days Gone had me interested from the get-go. But for whatever reason, I never installed it. Never gave it a proper try. Also, it's not like it's a new game anymore. It's been around for a bit now. But despite that, I can confidently say it manages to feel pretty fresh in a lot of ways. Recently, I finally decided to give it the attention it deserved. It was about time. So, I sat down, installed it, and dove deep into its world. After putting in a solid amount of hours, I feel ready to talk about it in detail. This won't be just a surface-level impression. I'll be going through the story, the gameplay mechanics, the characters, and of course sharing my overall experience. I think that's the best way to give you the full picture of what Days Gone has to offer. I've had this game on my radar since the moment it was released. Every time I thought about picking it up, something else would pop up on my gaming list, and it just kept getting pushed further and further down the line. It's funny, in retrospect, how many games end up in that category. Games you really want to play but somehow never get around to. In this case, I was missing out on what turned out to be a pretty damn enjoyable game. It's got that mix of survival, open-world exploration, and a kind of rugged, emotional storytelling that I generally enjoy in games. So, here I am now, after finally sinking hours into it, ready to give a full breakdown of my experience. I'm gonna try my best not to spoil too much, but I should probably say up front that I might drop some details here and there for the sake of explaining things properly. Context is key, after all. So, there may be a few spoilers sprinkled throughout, but they'll be necessary to get across the full scope of what I experienced in the game. The first thing I have to mention is that, for the first few hours, the story and characters didn't really hook me right away. I was playing and thinking, okay, this seems cool, but it wasn't grabbing me as much as I had hoped. And I get that this might be just a personal thing, but I didn't feel that immediate connection to the story or its characters. That started to shift the more I played, though, and by the end, I had a much stronger appreciation for what the game was doing. Days Gone drops you right into the chaos of this post-apocalyptic world, and you're playing as Deacon, a former biker turned bounty hunter who was also ex-military. He's got this gruff, worn-down vibe that makes sense, given everything that's happened in his world. He rides around with his buddy Boozer, and the two of them are basically doing jobs for different communities, taking on tasks, doing favors, and just trying to survive. They don't belong to any one group or community, though. Years before the events of the game, when everything first went to hell, we see how Deacon was separated from his wife, Sarah. She was injured, and Deacon had to make the tough decision to put her on a helicopter that would take her to safety, hoping they'd be able to treat her wounds. But the thing is, after that moment, they never reunited. The game heavily implies that she either died or disappeared, especially since the place where she was supposed to be taken was later destroyed in the chaos. Now, this storyline, this quest for answers about what happened to Sarah, was easily one of my favorite parts of the game. As the plot progresses, it becomes more and more central, and it's done in a way that really made me care. I liked how they built it up, and it gave me a strong reason to root for Deacon. You start to understand more about him, his motivations, and just how important Sarah is to his sense of purpose. Despite everything stacked against him, Deacon holds on to this hope that she's still out there, somewhere. The odds aren't in his favor, but he refuses to let go of that hope, and that desperation becomes a driving force throughout the game. It's one of those things that the more you see, the more you get it. His character starts to make a lot more sense when you understand just how much this belief keeps him going. Alongside that, Deacon's relationship with Boozer is another standout aspect of the game. Their dynamic is great, and there are some genuinely heartfelt moments between them. Boozer is more than just a sidekick. He's Deacon's anchor in a lot of ways, and their bond feels real. But as I said before, it took me a little while to get into the groove of the game. The pacing felt a bit slow, and I wasn't immediately hooked. I guess that's just how it goes sometimes with open-world games. There's a lot to set up, a lot to take in. But once I got past that initial slow burn, once I started understanding how the mechanics worked and how the story would unfold, I found myself really enjoying it. I mean, I stuck with it for a reason, right? As for the world itself, it's what you'd expect from a post-apocalyptic setting. But that doesn't mean it isn't effective. And the game doesn't shy away from showing how brutal that world can be. The cruelty of this new world is a recurring theme, and you see it in the way the game handles its factions. There are different groups, each with its own rules, and they don't always play nice with each other. It's something I've seen in other games, but it works here, especially because it adds layers to the world and gives you a sense of just how chaotic everything has become. This isn't a world where everyone is just trying to rebuild society. It's a world where survival means everything. and people will do whatever it takes to stay alive. The game introduces several characters along the way, especially as you visit different camps and settlements. There's this trust system where you can do jobs for these communities to build up your reputation with them. It's a cool feature that adds a bit more depth to your interactions with these camps, though I wouldn't say it's the game's strongest point. The secondary characters are fine. They serve their purpose, but some of them felt more like placeholders, just there to push things forward. I didn't feel a huge connection to all of them, which is fine. Not every character needs to be memorable, but a few definitely stood out more than others. There's this one guy, for example, who I knew right from the beginning was going to betray me. It was obvious from the way the game presented him. And sure enough, later on, that's exactly what happens. No surprises there. And then there's the antagonist, the leader of one of the factions. He's got a personal connection to Deacon's past, which I thought was a really cool concept, but I didn't feel like it was executed as well as it could have been. Still, it added a layer to the story, and I can't say I didn't appreciate the effort. Even if it wasn't perfect, it worked well enough to keep things moving. The enemies you face, whether they're human or infected, are pretty varied, and that helps keep the combat interesting. You've got human enemies using sniper rifles, others coming at you with melee weapons, and then some just straight up charging at you like maniacs. The infected are varied as well. You've got your standard zombies that can be taken down with a clean headshot, but then you've got others that are tougher, requiring more strategy to defeat. And of course, there are the big, hulking infected that are a real pain to deal with. You really have to use your environment when facing them, otherwise you'll be in trouble. Plus, there are wild animals roaming around that you have to keep an eye out for. The combat is satisfying, and once I got the hang of it, I had a lot of fun taking on enemies. You can use melee weapons or go in guns blazing, and there are skills that make things even more interesting, like the ability to slow down time while aiming, which really helps with precision. Deacon's motorcycle is more than just a way to get around. It's an essential part of the game. You have to keep it maintained, repairing it, refueling it regularly. And that adds a layer of immersion I wasn't expecting to enjoy as much as I did. At first, I thought it'd be a chore, but it actually became one of my favorite aspects of the game. You have to make regular stops to fix it up or refuel, and that makes the world feel more grounded. It also adds a bit of realism to the game, like you're not just zipping around without a care in the world. You have to think about where you're going and plan your routes. And while you do need to keep an eye on fuel and repairs most of the time, missions give you unlimited fuel, so it doesn't become a frustrating mechanic. It's balanced well enough that it adds to the experience without dragging it down. The exploration is great, and the game's world looks amazing. The environments are beautifully designed, with a mix of dense forests, destroyed cities, and weather effects that change throughout the day. The random rain, snow, and changing lighting conditions really bring the world to life. It adds so much atmosphere, making you feel like you're really part of this crumbling world. The missions, for the most part, are varied enough to keep things from feeling too repetitive. There were a few that felt a little too similar to each other, but it didn't detract from my overall enjoyment. The Nero missions, which involve a lot of stealth and eavesdropping, were probably the most repetitive of the bunch, but they do contribute to the game's lore, so I didn't mind them too much. One of the most intense aspects of Days Gone is the hordes of infected. These large groups of zombies can be terrifying to face, and the game does a great job of making you feel that sense of panic when they're chasing you. The hordes are placed in specific areas of the map, so you won't just stumble into them randomly while exploring, but they can still take you by surprise if you're not paying attention. The game explains that these infected hibernate during the day, hiding out in caves or dark places, and come out in large numbers at night. It's a cool detail that adds to the tension of exploring at night, knowing that the world becomes even more dangerous once the sun goes down. Overall, Days Gone is a game with its own unique style and identity. It has its flaws, sure, but it also does a lot of things really well. It's got solid mechanics, a decent story, and a world that's immersive and fun to explore. I wouldn't call it a masterpiece, but it's definitely a standout in the zombie game genre. It's just a shame the sequel was cancelled, because there was so much potential to build on what this game started. If you're in the mood for a good zombie game with some survival elements and a strong focus on character-driven storytelling, Days Gone is worth your time. You'll get lost in its world, no doubt about that. I regret not playing it sooner, but I'm glad I finally gave it a shot. I hope you enjoyed this breakdown. And if you haven't played it yet, maybe this convinced you to give it a go. If you've already played it, feel free to drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. Also, don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on future content. I hope to see you in the next one.